Someone a while back asked me a very odd question. The question, I can't remember the way it was exactly worded, but essentially the question was, is it better to be a sinner or to be a hypocrite? I'm not really sure what was meant by that. It is a very odd question. And a third party answered, and they said it's better to be neither of those. It's better to be saved by grace, which was an excellent answer. But I began to think about this word hypocrisy, and I began to think about how it's commonly used. And it dawned on me, I eventually realized that, you know, the way that we use the word hypocrisy today and the way that Jesus originally used it, sometimes there's a variance there. Christians are usually accused of hypocrisy, but there is a common misunderstanding. The most dominant view of hypocrisy is that hypocrisy is someone who doesn't practice what they preach. And there is some truth to this, but not necessarily so. That's not really the strict definition of what a hypocrite is. Now, to understand this, we have to go back to the way that Jesus used the word hypocrite, and we have to understand the word in that particular culture context. And the word hypocrite originally was not an inherently negative word. Today, when we think of movies and plays and the people who play those parts, we call them actors. And this is exactly what the word hypocrite means. It means someone who acts, whether it be oration at the time, you know, someone giving a speech or playing out a part, whether it be in a play. And so when Jesus wanted to describe the Pharisees, he used this word and he pinned it on them because when he saw their life and conduct, he saw them as hypocrites. He saw them as actors. Now you may say, well, Chris, well, there you have it. The Pharisees didn't practice what they preached, and so therefore that's what it means. But not necessarily so. Again, if we go to Matthew chapter 6, Jesus warns about not so much doing things publicly, but about the motives. So for example, in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people. And by righteousness, it means the things that we do to demonstrate we are the people of God, whether it be praying, whether it be fasting, or whether it be giving. That's what he's talking about, and that's clearly, explicitly what he says. He says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people. But the rest of the verse says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. And then he says again, Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, he warns against praying publicly with particular motives. He says, and when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, meaning the actors, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, public places, that they may be seen by others. And then again he says, Matthew chapter 6, verse 16, and when you fast. So notice that he says, he expects us to, here's another verse, I'm sorry, I missed this one, Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. He says, when you give to the needy, so when you give so far, when you pray, when you give, he says, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Verse 16, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, meaning the actors, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. And so when you read the entire chapter, Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is not saying this. He's not saying that praying in public shouldn't be done. He's not saying that when you give, you shouldn't be seen doing it. What he's warning against is that when he saw the religious leaders of his day, he says that they went to church, they went to the temple, you know, that was their church. They gave, they fasted, they prayed. Jesus is testifying that they did these things. And Jesus even affirmed that they tithe. So Jesus is saying the hypocrites, they give. The hypocrites, they fast. The hypocrites, they attend the temple. So Jesus is affirming that the hypocrites engage in all these things. So it doesn't really sound like someone who doesn't practice what they preach. The religious leaders very much did what they did. So then what does the word hypocrite mean? It means exactly what it means when we translate it to simply mean actor. It means that they're acting like they're godly by religious observances, whether it be praying, fasting, giving, and other things, but they really aren't godly. In other words, the primary motivation for engaging in religious activity is not out of a love for God, because Jesus says, I believe it's John chapter 5, I'm recalling it from memory, so he says, "For I know that you do not have the love of God in you." So Jesus tells them that they don't have the love of God. And so we cannot say, well, maybe they did love God. And no, Jesus says, no, they don't love God. The religious leaders of his day, the ones who crucified him, they didn't love God, yet they were extremely religious. Jesus called them hypocrites, meaning they appeared to be godly, but their religion was motivated out of a desire to please people. They wanted people to applaud them and to praise them for being upright people in the religious sense. They wanted to be godly without actually being godly. They wanted to appear godly without actually in reality being godly. And so Jesus called them hypocrites in the sense that they went to church, they engaged in all of the things that one would engage in at church, except in their heart they weren't there for God, they were there for other reasons. And that's why Jesus called them actors or hypocrites. So a hypocrite is not, listen, a hypocrite is not someone who does not practice what they preach. There is some sense in which a hypocrite is someone that doesn't practice what they preach, but it's first and foremost someone who puts on a show of religion who really isn't religious. And by religion I just mean somebody who is devoted to God, who is godly, but he actually isn't godly. And so that's what a hypocrite is. You know, well, I'll leave it at that. And so if we apply the definition of a hypocrite as someone who doesn't practice what they preach, in that sense, everyone in some measure is a hypocrite, because we don't always act consistently with what we believe. And there are several reasons for this. But for the believer, the one who is in Christ, he doesn't always act consistently with what he believes, because there's the struggle with the flesh, there's the daily battle with sin. In your spirit and in your heart, you want to obey Christ, but there are times of weakness. And so the difference is that you actually disagree with, like when you sin, you disagree with yourself. You hate your sin. You don't want to sin. So in your mind and in your spirit, you agree with God that those things are sins, but you find yourself struggling with sin. That's very different from somebody who has no conviction, doesn't care if they do sin. They're only worried about that in public they do appear as godly and upright. And there is the difference. So a hypocrite is somebody who strives to be godly on the outside, but doesn't really care about being godly on the inside. And so there you have it. That is the definition of a hypocrite. Matthew chapter 6.